Hello, friends, and welcome back to Stories About Entitled People. Our first story is what happens when a daycare refuses to protect a kid and a parent decides to take matters into their own hands. But before we begin, best way to support our channel is to leave comments, like, and subscribe with a turned-on bell so you don't miss the new video every single day. Here we go. Daycare said my kid should defend himself, instantly regrets it when he actually does. Years and years ago, when my oldest son was about 4, we had him in a pretty good daycare center about a block or two from where we both worked. After a while, though, we started getting incident reports, usually with one other boy biting my son. We complained after the second event and were assured it wouldn't happen again, but of course it did. Now, we really liked the daycare teachers and caregivers. It was just the administrator who wasn't very good. She wanted to avoid confrontations, she tried to calm us down, she didn't want to confront the other parents. Basically, she did nothing and hoped things would go away. Finally, in one meeting after yet another biting incident report, I asked why the biter didn't get suspended or kicked out. Well, he hadn't hit my son, so if he hit my son, he'd be out, but not for biting? Nope, that's what the rules say. It was something stupid about infants crawling around, occasionally gnaw on another, and they didn't know better, so they made the one-size-fits-all rule. The director suggested that my son really should defend himself. I'm sure she was thinking of pushing the biter away or staying away from him or calling a teacher, something very passive, which is what she always advocated. Okay, let me make sure of this. If my son defends himself, he won't get in trouble? Nope. Okay, I can work with those rules. Wicked grin, and my wife got a little worried. My son and I had a little project out behind the garage for quite a few evenings. The next time the biter got my son, the fruit of my loins laid him out. Really laid him out, just like I'd taught him. So we got summoned from work to a meeting at the daycare with the director and the other kids' parents. They were rather furious, so I waved the stack of incident reports of their young whelp biting my son, but my son hit theirs? Hitting was a suspension offense. With a grin, I repeated what the director had told me, that he was allowed to defend himself. He did so, just a bit aggressively. She nodded that I was right, cringing at having her own words used to defend what my son had done. The other kid was kicked out. The director wasn't happy with me, but as I told her, I knew I was going to have to take my kid out behind the house and teach him to defend himself. I didn't think it would be before kindergarten, though. I asked her if she'd have rather my son defended himself or that I'd have called Children's Protective Services, and she would have probably lost her job. She didn't really like me and was glad when we left. The administrator clearly underestimated what defending himself might mean, and honestly, she had that coming. It's satisfying to see how her own words came back to bite her. Good on you for protecting your kid and teaching him to stand up for himself. Seems like the lesson landed perfectly. And our second story. Clueless boss ignores time zones, threatens my job, instantly regrets it when VP steps in. One of my coworkers many years ago, a fellow I'll call George, was tasked with upgrading some servers located on the west coast of the US. As part of the process, he needed someone at that location to physically power cycle them. The first few days went okay, outside of his boss barking at him over email to do only the server upgrades every time he was seen out of his seat doing other work. Between Yum and APT and can you reboot AS107A please, he read a book and looked busy. Well, until the Monday when the West Coast guy went on vacation. His first call of the day went straight to voicemail, telling him to contact someone else instead. George did, only to hear the woman wasn't at her desk. Eventually, he dialed main reception at that office to see what was going on. Oh, she works graveyard and won't be in until 7 p.m. Try back after then. More waiting, more servers. Around 10 p.m. Eastern, he got his call back. Sorry, both our daysiders are on vacation for the next 2 weeks, so that only leaves me. I've gotten your list rebooted. You're good to go. Before walking out the door, George emailed his boss telling him about the scheduling snafu and asking if he could come in late. No, was the response. You're not special and you need to be in at 8 a.m. just like everyone else. George emailed back, what if I come in at 7 and do the reboots then? Thanks to the time zone difference, I can still catch the graveyard person and have sufficient warning if there's a problem. Once again, it was a hard no. He was not to postpone reboots, he was not to reboot them himself, and he was not to alter his starting time. The email went on to criticize his work ethic, telling him that if he was worried about the small amount of extra work involved, maybe he should find a different job. Okay, George was pretty sure his boss had just glossed over every Pacific Standard Time or Eastern Standard Time in his emails, as well as the references to time zones. But hey, following orders meant at least 5 hours a day and authorized overtime to sit and read a book, so score. And then Friday came. George knew that his West Coast contact didn't work Friday and that no one would be in the office at all to do a reboot, so he got started on a different project, letting his boss know he was blocked until Monday and requesting some details on the other project. Why are you asking about other project? The server upgrades are top priority, so stop trying to bullcrap me with this blocking nonsense and effing get them done, you jackwagon. I don't want to hear about this again. The email closed with a thinly veiled threat to fire George for any backtalk and a jerkish reminder that insubordination wouldn't earn him unemployment. So George followed orders. Along with reading his book, he spent a few minutes to fill out a backdated transfer application to my department. Maybe his boss will be happy to let him go after what he's about to pull. When 10:30 p.m. rolled around, he looked up the org chart. The boss didn't want to hear about it, but he had a problem and he had to speak to someone. After a few unanswered calls, as he went more or less straight up, George finally spoke to a confused vice president who asked for the relevant emails and told him to go home. The next morning, George had a shiny new email sent by his boss around 1 a.m. and conspicuously CC'd to the vice president, apologizing for his total failure to comprehend the time zones and schedules of those involved and the completely inappropriate tone and language in earlier emails. It was followed by another from the VP assuring George that he had done nothing wrong and that any concerns of any kind should be reported to him as soon as possible. He replied to the VP, "Well, sir, I applied for the open position in other department several days ago, and I'm afraid that given this incident and his past behavior, boss will block my transfer. This just might be what makes him lose it or discipline me in a way that makes me ineligible." Guess who got the desk next to mine 2 days later without so much as an interview? George. I wasn't even told I had a new guy until he was unboxing his desk and introducing himself. I love stories where arrogant bosses get a swift reality check directly from upper management. The VP's reaction and immediate support for George makes this even sweeter. Definitely satisfying to see George end up with a better role. Karma at its best. And our last story. Neighbor sets my aunt's house on fire out of spite. My aunt was always a strong, independent woman, a single mom who managed her own daycare service right out of her cozy suburban home. She loved her job, adored the kids, and had a knack for building warm, friendly relationships with her neighbors. Everything was peaceful until she encountered Linda, the woman next door who quickly became her nightmare neighbor. It all started after a heavy storm swept through town, leaving the yard scattered with branches and debris. The morning after, my aunt found her backyard littered with fallen tree limbs, far more than she could handle alone. As she stood outside, sighing at the mess, her neighbor's husband, a friendly guy named Steve, came strolling over. "Hey, looks like the storm hit you pretty bad." My aunt nodded. "Yeah, this is quite the disaster." Without hesitation, Steve began picking up branches. "Let me help you clear this up," he offered. Within an hour, they'd cleared the yard, laughing and chatting pleasantly. Grateful for the assistance, my aunt handed Steve a cold case of beer. "Thanks so much, Steve. Couldn't have done it without you," she said. "No problem," Steve replied, heading back home. That simple gesture ignited an unexpected storm of jealousy from Steve's wife, Linda, who interpreted my aunt's act of kindness as flirtation. From that moment on, Linda declared a silent war. One sunny afternoon, my aunt was out from watering her flowers when Linda's car roared out of her driveway, speeding recklessly close to the curb, directly toward my aunt's dog, Bailey, who had wandered slightly off the yard. "Bailey!" my aunt screamed, yanking her beloved pet back just in time. Linda sped off without even slowing down, leaving behind only the echo of her malicious laughter. Shaken but determined not to escalate matters, my aunt decided to ignore the incident, hoping Linda would move on. But Linda's hostility only grew. Weeks later, my aunt received a surprise visit from Child Protective Services. "We've received reports that you may be mistreating children under your care," the social worker explained gravely at her doorstep. Shocked, my aunt allowed the social worker in, reassuring her, "I love these kids like they're my own. Please take a look around." After a thorough inspection and interviews, the social worker found nothing amiss, later confessing, "Between you and me, this felt like a spiteful neighbor call. We see these occasionally." Unfortunately, she underestimated Linda's animosity. A few weeks later, she awoke to a strange smell lingering in the air. Investigating the backyard, she found charred grass and burnt siding on her house. Panicked, she immediately called her old friend Mark, the town's fire inspector. Mark carefully examined the scene and confirmed someone intentionally set a fire here using an accelerant. "You're lucky it didn't spread further." "Who could do something like this?" my aunt asked, voice shaking. Mark glanced towards Linda's house. "Do you have problems with your neighbors?" Realizing Linda's aggression had escalated dangerously, my aunt finally decided enough was enough. Gathering all the evidence, she took Linda to court, determined to put an end to the nightmare. In court, Linda feigned innocence, portraying herself as the victim. However, when Mark presented his official fire investigation report and the social worker testified about the baseless call, Linda's facade crumbled. The judge sternly addressed Linda, "Your behavior has been malicious and dangerous. This kind of harassment will not be tolerated." My aunt won the case decisively, and the judge granted her a restraining order, forbidding Linda from approaching her home or business. After the verdict, my aunt sighed deeply in relief. Though emotionally exhausted, she felt triumphant. As for Linda, she kept her distance, realizing that her toxic actions had severe consequences. Meanwhile, Steve eventually came by to sincerely apologize for Linda's behavior, embarrassed and saddened by what had transpired. My aunt accepted his apology graciously, saying, "It's not your fault, Steve. Sometimes people let jealousy ruin good things." Despite everything, my aunt continued running her daycare successfully. Linda took jealousy to a dangerous extreme. Who sets fire to someone's home out of spite? Good thing your aunt finally took it to court and got justice. Also, major respect to Steve for owning up to his wife's behavior. That's never easy. Glad your aunt could keep her daycare thriving despite such toxic behavior. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.